We're excited to be joined today by Carrie Thompson. Carrie is the Executive Director for Indiana University's Center for Rural Engagement, and she also authored the Wall Street Journal's opinion piece titled "Want to Move to the Countryside." If you have a question for her, please type it in the question box or use the raise hand feature, and I can unmute you once we get to the discussion and question and answer portion at the end. So at this time, I'll turn it over to you, Carrie.
Thanks so much, Alicia, and thank you all for having me today. It is always great to be in the presence of builders. I'll give you just a snapshot of my background. I actually spent 25 years in housing with Habitat for Humanity, most recently as the CEO of an affiliate here in Bloomington, Indiana, where we actually were the largest home builder in our county for the last 5 years of my tenure there. So I have a special place in my heart for builders. I always wanted builders at the table whenever we were discussing difficult things, because what you all know how to do is always take a problem and immediately find a solution instead of getting stuck in the problem. And likewise, you know, I have surrounded myself with some builders as we are looking at the Center for Rural Engagement with the problem of developing residential housing in rural areas throughout the state of Indiana. And as Alicia mentioned, I wrote an opinion piece in the Wall Street Journal that was published in December, and the outpouring of response from builders, from legislators, and from elected officials was relatively overwhelming. Everybody echoing my observations that residential home building in rural areas is needed and is extremely challenging. So I'm going to start just by sharing, I'll share a little slideshow, but I want to just mention to you all that I'm really hoping to have a discussion with you today. So ask me the questions, even the hard ones. Tell me what your observations are in our discussion section, and let me know ideas that you have for helping to solve some of these challenging obstacles. I just want to start by hold on, let me share the screen. I want to start by just telling you quickly who we are at the Center for Rural Engagement. The Center for Rural Engagement is housed at Indiana University, which is, of course, a Research One university. So we're driven by research, but also service and engaged teaching. And our mission is to partner with rural communities to help them achieve their visions of what it means to be a thriving rural community in the 21st century. And my slides aren't working. Here we go. So this is a little bit about what we do. And the important thing that we do is that we begin first with what communities want, and what their visions are, what obstacles they're trying to overcome. And then we come back to the university to see how our research and service might be able to partner with those community needs. So of course, so we have three pillars, just to give you a broad overview. We work in health, we work in community resilience, and then we work in quality of place. And our quality of place section is where we really see housing coming into play. And you can read these numbers while I talk, because I'm not going to talk through them. But our vision really is that when we're partnering with a community, we need to invite people to belong to that community in several different ways in order to attract the workforce that our rural communities need right now. In Indiana, we are partnering with communities, many of whom have had a 1% unemployment rate. My favorite mayor in Huntingburg, Indiana, always says 1% unemployment means everybody who wants to be working is working. And so the main challenge then is, how do we get people from outside our community to relocate here to fill those jobs? And housing, of course, is the crisis that that we're all facing. And I know even since I've had that piece published in the Wall Street Journal, we're seeing that that prices of lumber and drywall have skyrocketed. There are more complexities to the challenge now, even than there were before. But we have been working on the housing challenge for about 2.5 years. Our center was just founded 3 years ago. And when we started to go into communities, and when we visited the State House, everybody said, what are you going to do about housing? It was not part of our initial scope of work because, frankly, the university did not have a lot of expertise in housing research. We had a data center that does real estate development research, but not a lot of housing practice research happening. And so we got to work on envisioning what we could do in housing, in addition to the other things that we were doing in our quality of place focus area. A lot of those other pieces are around placemaking. So how does it feel to be in a community? What does the architecture look like downtown? And what kinds of events and other social kinds of supports are there to get people engaged in a community? But with housing, we decided really the best thing that we could do was to assemble some best practices for how to attract residential real estate developers and builders to your community, and to prepare to make it easy for them to do what they do best, which is to get the houses built. And so we got to work assembling what we call the Housing Ready Toolkit. And what this toolkit is really a playbook for how to support developers and builders and lay the infrastructure groundwork to ensure that residential development comes to your rural community. And so this Housing Ready Toolkit, and it is available online. You can download it, and that's actually the best way to access it. I'm happy to send Alicia paper copies, but we continue to update the links in the Housing Ready Toolkit, and so accessing it online is actually the most up-to-date way to tap into all of these resources. But we first worked on recommendations for what do you do if you don't have inspections or zoning, and how do you start to assess properties for potential real estate development. The goal being to take as much risk as possible out of the developer's hands, and really to start to pave the road for them so that they can have as low risk development opportunity as possible. I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir when I say that after the 2009 housing crash, most of the subcontractors and builders were not able to survive in some of these rural communities. And we in fact then also saw the upstream channel of laborers start to dry up. People were not, because the housing industry had really crashed, people were not interested in getting into those jobs. And so we have what I refer to as really an ecosystem challenge of building an entire ecosystem back in order to attract developers and builders. And so what we're looking at is a lot of windshield time to come from a larger metropolitan area or even a small city nearby. And so ensuring that we can take out some of that risk and make known quantities, known entities available to the developers and to the builders that want to partner with them was one of our main goals. We have worked hard to educate elected officials and plan commissions, plan committees, whatever they're called in these counties, about the challenges that are currently being faced in development work, and also how they can really create policies that are easy to navigate and very transparent, so that a builder can come in and know they either will or will not be approved, and how to get the resources they need. So the Housing Ready Toolkit, in addition to working on the policy side, we actually developed a tax model that is a financial modeling tool. Indiana has some of the most complex property tax rules that there are. It was meant to be simple, but it's very complex. I don't know how Wisconsin's compare, but what we had to do was actually load county by county actual tax data with GIS. And so we can tell a jurisdiction what their net property income is going to be from a property when it goes from, for instance, farmland to residential, or if it goes from commercial to residential, et cetera. And we can model that based on the number of units and the assessed value, et cetera, et cetera. So that's all in the toolkit. In addition, there are resources in that toolkit, and here you see the link to the toolkit. So there are resources about how to write a pro forma for people who really have never done this, all the way through what state and federal incentives are, financial incentives and assistance programs. But importantly, we also make recommendations to jurisdictions on how they can really partner with builders to make it financially feasible to come to some of these areas. What's happening in Indiana, and anecdotally I've heard is happening throughout the country, is there have not been a lot of housing starts happening, and in rural areas, and so there are not comps, and so the cost to build frequently exceeds the assessed value of a house, making lending very close to impossible. And so we have some tools in here for how to work with lenders, and also how to build the momentum of getting comps that can help support the value of the homes. So that was a whirlwind of our Housing Ready Toolkit and the work that we're doing. I want to talk just for 2 minutes about the national trends in housing, and especially in rural housing. A lot of us have been seeing national press about the desire to move to, as I put it in the Wall Street Journal, the countryside, given the pandemic and the increased remote work environments that we're seeing. We see that is happening in some areas. Those tend to be high tourist areas, areas that already have several elements of quality of place in place. So they have the what sociologists refer to as the third place. We think about home and work, and then humans have socialized themselves into having a third place. And so in the last decade, that has frequently been a coffee shop or a music venue, something like that, where you go and have a community of people. In earlier years, that was a church for people. And so what we're seeing is that a lot of rural communities don't have those built yet. That's part of why our quality of place focus is so important in attracting workforce. But places like ski towns in Vermont, of course, already have a robust environment of cafes and bars and restaurants that can support those desires from urban dwellers that are now able to work remotely and want to live full-time in a more rural environment. The other thing that those communities have that many of our rural communities don't have is broadband. And we continue to struggle in Indiana with the broadband infrastructure and the resources needed to get that into all of the areas of our state. But we do have recommendations within the Housing Ready Toolkit, and also are building a quality of place guidebook, which will also be available online soon, for how rural communities can start to create those third places for people, and how they can meet some of these needs that some of the in-migrants that we want are seeking when they're relocating rural. So here's how to reach us, and Alicia has my my email as well. But I am hoping, now that I have talked your ear off, that that we can have a conversation and I can answer some questions for you all on how this all works on the ground. And I'd also love to hear what you're seeing.
And while people are thinking of questions or typing them in, just a reminder, I can unmute you if you'd like to verbally talk, or you can type it in the question and answer or the chat box. And then also for those that are, especially for those that are joining on the phone, I will send an email to all of you following this with the links that Kerry was sharing in the presentation. So, anybody have questions, comments, anything they'd like to share? All right, Brad is our executive director. Are any large employers getting more involved to help employees with housing by either providing funding for housing, saving accounts, or building housing to provide to employees?
Yeah, that's a great question, Brad. So we have seen a few things happen. One of the key things that that has happened in a couple of areas is that employers have contracted with builders to build spec homes that are guaranteed, that the employer will guarantee a sale at the agreed upon cost. And what that does, of course, is it again takes the risk out. And so we have a large employer who guaranteed 10 of them in one of our rural communities and guaranteed the sale price as well. That employer also was able then to leverage some influence with a lender that would lend at the value of the house, and that employer did not actually have to step in and buy any of those houses, though they had guaranteed that they would. They had employees who bought them, and so then they rolled that agreement, because this employer is in several of our rural communities. They rolled that agreement into another geography, and they're just starting that now. And the saving accounts and building houses. So the other thing that we were trying to get off the ground, and there's an interesting tax incentive model in Indiana that we thought we found a loophole in and needed a little bit more legislative support, but it's an interesting concept and we'd like to get it off the ground. Was a model that 5 employers in one of our rural geographies got together, and they all agreed that they would provide $20,000 of down payment assistance to new employees who were migrating in. So either they're just out of college and are migrating, back home, or they're coming into the area from elsewhere. $20,000 as a signing bonus, essentially, in down payment assistance. And then they have an agreement with the employer that they have to, that is forgiven. It's essentially set up as a loan. It's 100% forgiven if they stay with the employer for 5 years. And then, but it's repaid on a prorated basis if they leave prior to the 5 years. The deal with the state was that was supposed to be a tax-free, a write-off for the employers, and we couldn't quite get that done, but we're still trying to work on that. So that's a really, it's an interesting model.
And then Jim Doring, he is a member of ours in the greater Milwaukee area, asked, how is the environment of not in my backyard public in areas of rural development in Indiana?
I'm not totally sure I understand the question.
Jim, I'm gonna unmute you so you can talk. Oh, let's see here. Jim, you can, I think you're unmuted, so you can ask your question now.
Oh, he's on the phone. Okay. So Jim, let me ask you a clarifying question. Do you mean not in my backyard, meaning existing community residents don't want any in-migration? Don't want people from outside the community coming in? Yes. So it's interesting, Jim, because we see some of that, but actually relatively little. And what we have found is that frequently that perception is based on whether community values will get stepped on or overridden by people coming from larger urban environments. And frequently what is happening when we do get an influx of new residents is some clarity that that folks are actually migrating to rural areas partially because of the values there, and because they like the wide open spaces, but also the values that folks in our Indiana rural areas express are of strong community ties, and valuing family, and also valuing hard work and pride in hard work. And so while we hear a little bit of it, the prevailing opinion seems to be we're running out of resources, and if we can't attract new people to live here, we will be a dying community. I think some of the residents who articulate that well have been able to really make that pathway clear. And I don't think none of our work, and I think I don't believe any of the rural leadership work is aiming to make these rural environments urban. It's just a matter of filling jobs and being able to have enough population base to support schools and to support the economy as it is.
All right, do we have any other questions? Brad asked, has a strong housing economy hurt development in rural areas? No incentive for developers and builders to go to a new area because they are so busy in the area they currently work in.
Absolutely, I would strongly agree with that. We've worked with several developers to try to entice them to come to rural areas. And in talking to them, they will, and that, Jim, is also tied to, is that Jim? No, Brad. That also is tied to the challenge with the influx of labor. We're not seeing it, and as we know on the national news now, everybody is looking for employees, and so the skilled trades are especially suffering. And so the success and the sort of booming building economy in more urban areas is definitely not an enticement to leave and go to a place where you can maybe only have 2 houses going at a time instead of the 20 that you have in production, and get your plumbing company to come all in one day and do the rough in for everybody. And there are some recommendations in the Housing Ready Toolkit for how to stage things and develop wisely. But I think we are continuing to learn about best practices in those areas.
All right, then Jim has a couple questions. Is zoning allowing any types of density for development, for example, less than 1 acre lots? And for workforce price levels, is multifamily housing in the conversation in rural areas?
Yes, so we are inserting it into the conversation in rural areas, multifamily housing, and also zoning allowances. Now, some of our rural communities don't have any zoning at all, which is actually a challenge for some developers because they want to make sure that the value of their homes don't drop. If a pig farmer comes next door, for instance. And so having no zoning is also as much of a challenge as having too stringent zoning. So it's coming into play. The infrastructure, of course, is a key piece of that, though, because the lack of sewer systems means that you have to have enough acreage for a decent septic system, et cetera, et cetera. But zoning allowances are very much part of the conversation that we're having.
All right, we've got a couple of minutes left, so if you have questions, please get them in. Mark Etrim stated, the issue is current residents don't want affordable housing as they perceive them to be undesirable people, too many kids that increase school costs, higher crime, etc.
Mm-hmm. So Mark, I'm not clear if that's a question or a statement, but I will sort of respond in a way that it's both. I do think that there are some issues with perceptions of affordable housing. I also think that nationally we need to change the conversation to housing affordability, meaning, affordable housing tends to come as a proper noun, as a named thing that means subsidized. But what we're seeing actually is that even middle income households are having a hard time affording to get into the ownership market. And those populations don't seem to have the same stereotypes associated with them as those who are technically in need of affordable housing. And I think what we can show with the data is that there is actually a lack of housing in many of our rural communities. And we just did a 11 county comprehensive housing study with a partner of ours. In many of our counties, it's actually the middle and upper middle class income levels that can find no housing. Nothing is transferring. Families get in a house and they stay in a house. There's not even a custom home builder in the community. So you can't buy 5 acres and build a custom home. So I think there's many levels of the housing need in rural areas right now.
And then I think the last one, just for your time, Jim asked, is manufactured housing present in rural areas?
Yes, there is some manufactured housing. As I think probably everybody on the call knows, there's many levels of manufactured housing, and I think those tend to be sort of one-offs in most of these rural areas. So an individual would contract to have a manufactured home.
All right, last question from our executive director, who is an Indiana grad. What is your favorite place on America's most beautiful campus, Indiana University?
Well, my obligatory response would have to be Maxwell Hall, if you're familiar with it, Brad, because that's where our office is. And I can maybe flip back to the picture of Maxwell Hall so you can remember it. Let's see. This one here is Maxwell Hall. But I would say, you know, my honest answer about that is that I really have been enjoying Dunwoods lately. And with the unfortunate pandemic, the most beautiful campus in the world has actually been my very favorite state park because it's been very quiet.
Mhm. Sounds great. Well, thank you so much, Carrie, for taking the time to join us today, and thanks for all of you who joined us. And just as a reminder, I will be following up with some links for the links that Carrie shared, as well as links for you guys to sign up for future sessions. So thank you again, Carrie. We really appreciated your time.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks.